Welcome everybody to today's webcast on our series, which is the Natural Health and Natural Food Health and Wellness webcast series and podcast. Today, great guest today is Sheldon Garfinkel, who's a CFO with 25 years plus experience, specifically in food, CPG, protein, bakery. Very exciting conversation. Welcome, Sheldon, to today's event. Welcome.
Nice to see you, Bruce.
And we're going to talk about a very specific topic called knowing the numbers. This is a topic we're talking about today. So Sheldon, before we get into it, you want to tell us a bit about yourself? Did I cover everything, or you want to talk a bit about yourself? Anything?
I never like to talk about myself, but I've 25 years in the pork business, and since then been doing advisory work for number of companies at different levels of the spectrum, and all with experiences in the health area, new types of businesses, new types of markets. Sorry, products coming to market. It's all very exciting area.
It is a very exciting time. Very exciting. Good. And you're also an interim CFO and a fractional CFO, which is great. And, okay, so we're going to talk about knowing the numbers. Tell us more. Because we've both seen this. Yeah. Tell us your experience. Yeah.
We've seen all through our, Bruce, you and I go back to our audit days. So
and we go back 30 years.
And I'm sure those who are listening to this have their own experiences too. So, listen, at the end of the day, there's really, from my perspective, there's two paths of numbers that business, especially in the growth stage, need to focus on. One, of course, being the regular, financial statements that are required for the compliance work. And then the other being there, and what I end up spending most of my time with multiple companies at this stage is on the cost accounting side and driving productivity and performance and putting management systems in place for being able to monitor KPIs. But just to the first path, my overall point would be is that, of course, as businesses grow, there's more focus, or there ought to be more focus on getting their numbers produced not only on a monthly basis and sometimes on a quarterly basis, but I'm more about getting numbers as early as on a weekly basis. So very often what I have found coming into companies in growth stages, or about to go and enter into a new level of growth, is that they either find themselves behind in their reporting, or the reporting is on time, but the reporting is not in a manner that allows them to look at the numbers in a sensible way to be able to measure performance. So looking at their groupings, what they include in cost of sales versus what they should be including in facility costs versus administrative costs is very often a confusing point for them, but something that needs focus on, because again, it allows them to communicate the right messaging and show the numbers reflective of their business, so that it could be pegged, if you will, to other businesses in the same industries or to their financial lenders. So that's the challenges that I typically see in regards to I'll call the first path of traditional financial reporting. But more so and more important from my perspective is that management needs to be able to make decisions on correct numbers. Of course, I just said a motherhood statement, but very often, because of growth patterns in the business, they do not have all the right information that they need around them to be able to make the right decision. And in absence of it, they feel that they have to make the decision regardless, because the business has to move forward. And at times they are at risk of, for the right reason, making a decision, but maybe the wrong decision because they don't have all the appropriate information around them. So what am I referring to specifically?
Yeah, it costs you, I'd like to know the financial impact.
Yeah,
ranking. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
So, so if one is making a decision about whether they should be entering or creating a new line of product, as an example, and they perform their research and development, and they're comfortable that they're coming up with a product that will have all sorts of desires and demand and the marketplace, they still need to obviously cost it right. And so there has to be a good knowledge of how they cost their program and that specific new product, taking into account of what as well the any new equipment that may be required for it, economies of scale, and understanding that if the orders don't come in at the right levels as expected, that typically drives the costs up. Have they put enough buffer into account, because again, it's a new product. So these are types of scenarios that need to be addressed when coming up with costings of a new product. But it doesn't have to relate to a new product either. It could relate to the existing product line. It could relate to a company only has a certain number of production hours available to it. And so are they optimizing their production during the allotted time that they do have, let alone looking at, what the numbers could be if they were to look at double shift or even doing 3 shifts a day. So there is a constant need for data to be able to make the right decisions. So specifically, do they have management reporting that literally is in place for every step of production? Is data gathered at every step of the production so they can understand, so what is my labor input at that particular area of production? Are the raw materials being used effectively? Is there a large waste factor in place? So understanding the costs, but at the same time putting processes in place to not only track the cost, but to track the movement of product through the plant floor. These are all parts of a system that ideally would be in place. And yes, it's important to know from the standard cost perspective what the numbers are, but even more so are they're the same systems that would allow for end-to-end traceability, as an example, and accountability for the specific areas of production at every step of the way. So understanding all that, putting that in place is sometimes or at times challenging for companies that are already in the midst of a growth phase that may not have either the bandwidth or to put a system like this in place, or enough attention drawn to it. So ideally, there's data to support decisions that are made, and sufficient data that could be looked upon and investigated and validated before decisions are made.
And it might also affect it might or may not require a change in the technology. Because if you need this information, like does your current, so you said your systems provide the information. Am I on the right track here? So the
No,
systems
you're right.
provide,
Absolutely.
like maybe they need to be tweaked. Like there might be so many decisions behind that. At the end of the day, it sounds like at the end of the day, you better know your margins are crossed, because if you don't, you could be making decisions that are harmful to the business.
Absolutely. And listen, there's
Not harmful, but counterproductive to the business.
counterproductive, or
Yeah.
just not with the right focus. And so, maybe I'm saying the obvious, but the reality is that having a robust management reporting system that would be able to track labor utilization, that would track material usage, waste factors, right through the entire process is absolutely ideal. And then from that, being able to look at the data, like I said, on a weekly basis, so that you know how you're doing. I mean, weekly is late. You want to, if as best as possible, have real-time data that when you walk on the floor, then you know where you stand. You know, if by now it's 10 o'clock in the morning and I should have had X number of either batches prepared or products crossing the floor scales, etc. So that you can evaluate on a real-time basis how the plant is performing and identify, because nothing works to plan, of course. So then most importantly, be able to affect change and to make the folks on the floor, specifically the supervisory folks, to be aware of what the opportunities may be.
Do you have an example where you actually went in, we actually went, part of your roles, you actually went in and would appear to be one way, and you haven't, like, I always love hearing about dollars. You know what I mean? Hey, the before and after, hey, this was a piece of, I use a piece of bread as an example, like this loaves of, it could be anything, right? Like this was before, and what they thought was going on wasn't really what was happening. And when we flipped it, do you have any specific, in your experience, any specific example that you can share?
I guess many.
Just being confidential. Yeah, just pick one and being confidential, keeping the confidentiality. Just curious, I always like to put it to a dollar. Yeah.
I think let me say this. I mean, there's ones that come up literally every day.
Yeah.
What's really important is that when we sit in a boardroom and you say, okay, what my labor cost is, I think my labor cost is X dollars per case or X dollars per kilo. It's important to understand if that number is correct. And the same thing goes for every other aspect of an input cost. Very often, and it's in this market where, of course, you are, margins may be tight or you have to make decisions. It's very important that if you know the numbers, that you can drill down and really understand the numbers, not from only an overall perspective, but by specific areas of production. So my examples, if I were to expand on them, would be where there is a concept and belief of what the cost is in a designated area. And when you drill down and you find out that the cost is a lot higher, and then you drill down and you say, well, why is that? You very often find that either of two scenarios, that you have 4 people in the area, but you really, if you're focused on it, if you really drill down, you'd see that you would only need 3 people. Then you'd be able to identify, so in understanding the costs, it also gives you the ability to highlight where the possibility and the opportunities are for cost savings. And the same thing goes on material. And you look at the material and you look at the usage and you go, so why is the usage variant? Well, you may not even have a variance, but if you were to track what the usage would be for one particular product versus another, it then lends itself to an analysis that may give rise to, and this is what we've seen, where there is more usage because of an inappropriate process that exists on the floor. So very often the focus is on the dollar cost, but if you are able to use that data to then ask the question of why, or is there a better way, generally speaking, that you will find a better way, and that will drive productivity improvements and savings. And those, when it's all said and done, will drop to your bottom line.
So why typically do companies then not do this? Like, or do they, like, or get it wrong?
It's important to put the processes in place. So you need to have
bandwidth. Yeah.
The bandwidth. You need to have the right people in the right place. So it's easy to say bring new technology on the floor, and we're just basically equivalent of, it's never a question of pushing a button, but putting that new technology on the floor will give us real-time data. But it's more so, you need to have the culture of the folks on the floor be willing to accept it and take on that new technology and that new idea of, we want to be more productive, we want to be more cost effective, we want to be careful about the raw materials around the floor, especially these days with inflationary pressures. So it's bandwidth, but it's also about the desire to be better, and how do you instill that in your culture on the floor. And you really, from my perspective and experience, only do that when you work closely with the people on the floor. It can't just be something that's concocted in your boardroom that you're just going to implement and expect the results to be there in a week later. It won't happen. It has to be immersed and accepted, and therefore time needs to be taken to explain and, in a sense, educate the folks. But when you do all that, there's no question, and I've seen it enough, that there's always room for improvement. We can always be better, right?
Of
As
course.
individuals, but as companies, and therefore it allows us to just focus on what matters, and just get folks to hopefully take it in under their belt as much as it's under your belt, and everybody is going in the same direction. Doesn't always happen that way, and it's always a difficult process, but certainly that is a big part of the process. Getting the technology correct and putting the new process in place, that's up to us as management or CFOs to see that through, working closely with product production and supervision and production floor management. But at the end of the day, it's also always remembering that there's people that will drive all this, and they have to be part of the process.
You made a very good point, and we're going to end shortly, about instilling the culture. You know, putting it, because that is the way to do it. Because once it's in the culture, it becomes part of the DNA of the business, and it's so easy when we start to have a sales culture. But if you just say focus on sell, 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 that's good. But eventually you got to look at the entire. That's a whole other discussion. You got to look at the entire.
Absolutely, but in understanding the numbers, going full circle to
understanding the numbers,
started,
exactly.
understanding the numbers is also understanding the processes and
Good,
understanding the people. So at the end of the day, it's more, as accountants, we always say we're about the numbers, but I think many of us believe that it's more than that. And as CFO, interim CFO, we're more than just the numbers, but it's always starts with the numbers.
You're right. Well, but it goes into the culture, and Sheldon, this was extremely insightful. And
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. No, thank you so much. Very, very insightful. And I learned something. And I've been an accountant for 30 years. You know, and no, look, you have 30 years in this, and you've seen it all. You've seen a lot in your time. Sheldon, thank you so much.
Okay, appreciate it. Good seeing you, Bruce.
Yeah.